Hey viewers, this is a follow-up on the Graves preview review I did yesterday or the day before. I think yesterday. And the calculation in that, because a lot of people didn't seem to understand what the calculation was supposed to teach, what it was about, things like that. And so I'm kind of trying to let you understand what the calculation is, and the fact that it's not a literal calculation. It is all relative and depending on what you want for your game. So we will start with the assumptions. You can see them on the right side here. We are going to assume a couple of things and go from there. If you change the numbers on this or change the assumptions in general, there will be another outcome, but that all depends on what you want from your game. So anyway, the gold intake from for all champions is the same. We're going to assume that practically that's not true, but we have to assume something about the gold intake, and we cannot assume that defensive champions have less gold intake than offensive ones, because it doesn't make sense. So the fact that you don't get any minion kills with your support, that's a choice. That's not game design. That is a choice, a strategy. And that has nothing to do with the balance of the game. Because you can choose not to take minions. You can also not take minions because you just cannot last hit. That's also not game design. Game design is purely based on balancing the game. So we're going to assume gold intake for all champions is the same. Then, champions should not die in a 1v1 in less than 5 seconds, meaning that if you have two champions which are exactly the opposite of each other, one is attack damage, the other one is purely defensive, there should always be 5 seconds of time to run away, or rather to flash out, or who knows. I chose 5 seconds because it's 2 stuns and then 1 second for most of the stuns, because most of the stuns last under 2 seconds or less. So you always get the chance, if you're full health and you get engaged on by one enemy champion, you always get the chance to get out. Anyway, it's just a choice, it doesn't really matter. Then regeneration effects are cost effective in 100 seconds, that's my assumption. It's just a number. I base this on nothing. Currently this is 56 seconds, by the way, from regrowth pendants. If you calculate it, and you can see the calculation here, it's 435 gold, and you divide it by the amount of gold you make per second. At the moment HP costs 2.58 per HP. So basically you get 56 seconds, after which the item is cost effective, compared of course to another item, in this case the Giant's Belt. So then the next assumption, AD champions do 250 damage per attack with 1.5 attacks per second. That's 375 damage per second. That's just a bunch of random numbers. I mean, I just have to assume something, so this is my number. AP champions do 1500 damage with 0.2 attacks per second, meaning you can use your skills once every 5 seconds. It's just an average, it doesn't really matter. It's 300 damage per second. Okay-ish. So 1 AP gives a champion 2.8 damage per 5 seconds, because he can use his skills every 5 seconds. Therefore the 5 seconds. And this is just 0.7 is kind of an average AP scaling factor, and 4 because you have 4 skills. Yeah, then champions have 2500 HP. Next assumption. Really doesn't matter too much what you pick, as long as you pick something. The rest of this, so tuning these numbers, is all, yeah, that's all details. That's not what I want to show you here. So then AP and AD increase should do the same DPS, meaning that if you buy 1 attack damage, that should result in the same DPS increase as 1 AP. No, not 1 AP increase the same amount of gold. If you buy AD for 100 gold, you should have the same increase in AP damage for that amount of gold. That's what it says. Then mana to HP costs should have a ratio of 0.9. That's the actual ratio it is now. So I'm just going to assume we keep that, meaning that if I set the HP cost, I also set the mana cost. It gives a relation between the two, and it's not really important what number you take. I mean, if you make mana a lot cheaper, then people will be able to use spells more, sure, but it's only a concern in the early game. Late game it's more about cooldowns anyway. Then gold items should pay themselves back in 800 seconds, which is the current average on the gold items. So the gold per 10 items. Yeah, they pay themselves back in about 30 minutes and 20 seconds. And then we'll see that later, but I'll discuss it now. It's not an assumption, but because of the way armor and magic resist is calculated, the armor and magic resist cannot be balanced properly. Well, it can of course be done, but I'm not going to do it in a spreadsheet. I'm not going to even tell you how to do it, because it's well beyond the scope of what I want to show you here. Anyway, we're going to get, probably this one first. So first of all, we're going to set an amount, the amount you get for each of the numbers. So HP, I can say 1 HP, but I'm choosing 100 HP. And 100 HP is going to set me back 100 gold. That is a choice. The yellow ones are choices. So armor, let me get all of the yellow ones. Hang on. Why didn't that work? I don't know. All of the yellow ones. So armor costs 156 for 10 armor. Magic resist 154 for 10 armor. Those are the numbers that they are now at this moment. So the HP, that's also just a number. So this one is just a number. These are the ones that they are now. So in the game, this is the one, so slow of 10% currently costs 263 gold, and movement speed increase of 10 currently costs 111 gold. So far this is the only number I made up myself, and it doesn't matter. These 5 values can be changed independent of each other. They're not in any way connected. So first of all, because I say I have HP regen per 5, I have 5 HP regen per 5 for my unit. That means 1 HP per second, and I had the assumption that they need to be cost effective in 100 seconds, resulting in 100 gold. So I can do this for all of them, and we will see that there are some relatively high numbers. So dodge, 10% dodge should cost 3750. 10% lifesteal the same, because both of them prevent or heal you for 25 HP per second. It's only when in a fight, I know that, but yeah, this is purely based on the fact that 10% dodge means that you dodge 1 in every 10 attacks. And since you have 375 damage per second, no, that's not the one. 250 damage, 10% of that is going to be prevented, and in this case 10% of that is going to your HP. So these are all defensive items, although lifesteal is in the offensive items, but it really is a defensive item because, well, you gain HP from it. And then spell vamp 10% is, because you do 1500 damage, is 150 HP per 5 seconds, so that should cost 3000 gold. That's all related to, and you can see that, to the HP regen, or HP regen, and the champion should not die in less than 5 seconds, things like that. So all of these are related to the HP basically, because HP is related to HP regen, blah blah. Then the attack damage. Attack damage is actually related to the HP, as well as champions should not die in less than 5 seconds. And if you calculate the 150 DPS increase, it should cost 750 gold. So same for critical strike, which increases your DPS by 37.5, and it should cost this much. And then same for attack speed, because it does exactly the same from a mathematical point of view. The AP, because you should do the same amount of damage as an AD champion. You can actually derive the cost for AP from the cost of AD, which is based on other things that we already determined. Then armor penetration and magic penetration are based on armor and magic resist, because they should be, for a balanced game, they should be exactly double the cost of armor or magic resist. Because if you have a balanced game, then buying armor should result in the same decrease in damage that our armor penetration should have in increase. So why the factor 2 then? Because if you're defending, so if you're buying this stuff, then you have to buy armor and magic resist. While if you're attacking, you only need one of the two. So these should be twice as expensive as their counterparts in the defensive department. So slow, as I said, is just a number from the game. It comes from what's it called? This is annoying. Doesn't matter. The big hammer, the blue hammer. I really forgot the name, and that is really stupid. Anyway, the movement speed comes from the boots. Yeah, you can just calculate it. The mana is based on the fact that we have 0.9 mana to HP costs, so it's 90 instead of 100. The mana regen per 5 is based on the mana. The cooldown reduction increases your AP for an AP carry. It increases your damage by 30 DPS, because I'm assuming that all of your damage comes from your spells. It's not entirely true, but it's mostly true. So it's 30 DPS, and with that you can actually calculate the cost of that. And the gold per 10, well, since it needs to be cost effective or repay itself in 800 seconds, that should be 400 gold. That's okay. So, where are we going now? We're going to go to what does everything cost then. Oh, first of all, let's put these skill factors in. So, for late game items, you can modify that. I mean, I really don't like this. I like to have a linear progression of the game. So for late game, I input that items in the late game, so bought at like 45 minutes, should cost 80% of the ones in the beginning of the game. That's because in the beginning of the game you don't want people to have too many items, because then you get kind of the dominion structure, which kind of sucks, in my opinion. Because I know that a lot of people like it, but from a game design standpoint, it's not very good to have that. Then the big items are going to be 2% cheaper than the small items. We saw that in the previous video. That is common practice in everything, so we're going to assume that's true. This skill factor for late game should be time dependent, so you should start with 100% and that should get lower and lower and lower as long as the game progresses. But that's not in the game at the moment. It could be in the game. People commented on it that late game items should be less expensive than early game items in order to finish the game when you're ahead in the end, blah blah. Anyway, you can see all the costs here. It doesn't really matter. This is all relative to each other. So that means that if you have and this is based on a scaling factor, which I'll show in a minute. Anyway, this is all relative to each other, so meaning that if HP costs 150, dodge should cost 5,625 per unit. I mean, 10% dodge, 100% HP. And then you can see that dodge, lifesteal, spell vamp, that should be incredibly expensive to make it balanced in the game. Well, then we finally get to what this is actually about. Oh, by the way, the brutalizer, somebody asked for that. I needed it for this calculation. So here's the brutalizer. It provides 25 AD, 10% cooldown reduction, 15 armor penetration, and it costs 1337. And here you have what it actually costs. So it's 7 times it should be 7 times more expensive, but this is based on these numbers, on what it should be, not what it actually is. But yeah. Do with it what you will, I don't care. People ask for it, I'll make it if I have the time. Anyway, this is the scaling, let's put it to balanced. So for a balanced game, this should all be 1. So now everything is exactly the way it should be, and well, that's cool. So let's see what we could do to make the game an offensive game, meaning that if you are the attacker, if you are aggressive in the game, you'll get an advantage. So we will make the items that give you HP and such, and armor. So the defensive items are going to get more expensive. I choose 1.5 here. You could also just do 1.1 or something, I don't know. The offensive items are going to be a lot cheaper, and the utility items are going to stay the same. Of course, increasing this with 50% and reducing this with 50% is kind of stupid. That's way too much. So it should be more like 1.1 and 0.9, or even 1.05 and 0.95, something like that. Anyway, you can see how the cost here changes. So you can see that for an offensive game style, if you want to have offense, so like you have in Dominion, you should not change the items. You don't have to change the items, you just have to change the gold they cost. So the items are still the same, the champions are still the same, everything is still the same, it's still balanced as a group. So all the defensive items still do the same, all the offensive items still do the same, but there's a difference now between the gold you have to pay for defensive items and the gold you have to pay for offensive items. Because the offensive items are getting cheaper, the defensive items are getting more expensive. So defensive game style, that is, well, normally not really desired in the gaming community, because it means that you will have very long gameplays, and people don't like that. But you can see the same, you reduce this one, you increase this one, so it's exactly the opposite of the other one, but yeah, this one will become really cheap, so you have really cheap HP, and you have really expensive offensive things. Then if you want to make it skill based, so if you want to make sure that the best team or the best player always wins, you should decrease the cost of utility spells and keep the rest the same, basically. And yeah, that's not really game mode. So as I said, balanced is when everything is 1, and that's actually mathematically correct, except for, of course, the balance between these 5, because that's a choice. I generally just picked the HP, took the other ones from the game, but yeah, for the rest it's the same. Now let's look, and this is where it gets interesting, at how it currently looks. So currently we see, and this is where this is, by the way, is where the brutalizer came in, because the brutalizer is the only item with armor penetration. You only have one item for dodge as well, so that's the ninja tabbies. And the ninja tabbies also are too cheap, which means that I have a negative number here. Also here a negative number. So at this moment, health is 2.5 times too expensive. HP regen is 1.5 times too expensive. The armor and magic resist, because I took it straight from the game, it is the same. You can see the gold values here, by the way. So this would be the ones that are in game now. Dodge is too cheap, way too cheap. Lifesteal is too cheap, also way too cheap. Actually, well, you get money back for dodge, actually. Lifesteal is, at the moment, it's 10% of what it should be. So it currently costs 375 per 10%, and it should be more like 3,750. Spell Vamp also way too cheap. Then AD is too expensive, Critical Strike is too expensive, attack speed is too expensive, AP is way too cheap, it should be 20 times more expensive. Armor penetration is too cheap, magic penetration is too cheap, and well, in this part, magic regen, everyone knows this, it is way too expensive. It's almost impossible to get in the early game, and in the late game you don't need it because your character will have a mana pool that increases with level, and normally, yeah, you just take some mana because it's a lot cheaper than mana regen. Yeah, what this means, by the way, is that your regen effect, so your mana regen, is only effective after like 300 seconds. And I chose 100, so if you balance that, or if you change this to 300 seconds, it would come out in the same. And that's okay. But then, well, the cost would be lower and, well. Anyway, cooldown reduction currently is too expensive, and, well, gold per 10, I took that from the game, so it is, yeah, so this one should actually also be yellow. But I didn't choose it. I chose it. I got it from the game. So what we see here is a complete unbalance between the items in the group. I mean, there's under 0 to 2.6, under 0, well under 0 to 4.9 in one group. So basically getting armor penetration is way cheaper than getting attack damage. And that shouldn't be happening. I mean, that's why there is limit to all of these things. There's no reason to limit critical strike to 100% if you're going to make it this expensive. There's no reason to limit, I don't know, there's a lot of things limited, come on. They should limit lifesteal, by the way, if it's this cheap. Oh yeah, penetration, the armor penetration, magic penetration, yeah, they're limited to 0, yeah, that you can never get under 0, and that's kind of logical if you go for armor penetration that is way too cheap. Fortunately, there's only one item for that. And what we see here is cooldown reduction being really expensive, but yeah, well, cooldown reduction is kind of a special thing that just gets added to some of these items that we buy for completely different purposes, and yeah, that really doesn't disturb the game a whole lot, except, well, it is really, really expensive, and that's why you don't see the pros get a whole lot of cooldown reduction, because it's just not efficient. So anyway, what we see here is that this game is completely unbalanced. This should all be 1, or at least all be the same number. And if it is all the same number, so yeah, that's what I wanted to say in the beginning of the game. If it looks like this, it is balanced. But if it looks like this, then it's also balanced. I mean, this is exactly the same as the other, so as if it were all 1. But in this case, all items are going to be way cheaper, so the game is going to go a lot faster. So the scaling factor kind of gives you the well, the tempo of the game. So how quickly do I want my game to progress? If I make all of this 1, and I base this on good numbers, then I have the game that I have now. If I make this all 0.5, then I have a game in which people can buy 50% more items, and no, actually double the items, so 100% more items, because their gold is worth double what it used to be worth. And by doing that, by looking at it in this way, so first balancing it, and after you balance it, actually saying, well, I want the items to be this cheap or this expensive. That's how you balance a game. You don't just go up and say, well, in my opinion, because a lot of people buy HP in this game, I think HP should be 5 times more expensive, so I'm going to add a 5 here. And now it's still balanced. No, that's not the way to do it. I mean, if you make HP more expensive, that means automatically that everything else is going to be overpowered. Or rather, HP is going to be underpowered, so people are going to buy armor instead and HP regen instead. So then you say, well, everybody's buying the armor, so let's increase the armor. So now I increase my armor to 5 and I increase magic resist to 5, and then I say, well, at this moment attack damage is completely overpowered, so let's make that 10. And yeah. So, because nobody can afford HP anymore, attack damage is going to be overpowered, and I'm going to increase that, the cost of that. But then I say, well, now this whole game is... I cannot buy any items anymore. So now I'm going to reduce all the cost of all the items by 50%. And that's how Riot is doing this. It's completely out of control. Because if I reduce all of the costs, you can see it's still unbalanced. And people are just going to buy more items that are cheaper or more cost effective, actually. And I really, really, really wish they would finally hire a mathematician and just do this for them, because obviously this is an example. The game itself is a little more difficult, but not a whole lot. You just need a matrix like this one is, matrix of all of the items, what they do, what they cost, and you make a calculation on that. You get a result, and then you have a completely balanced game. Once more, that's just the items. The champions are a completely different matter. And balancing the champions is exactly the same thing, because you just need to make this matrix of numbers. You just write down the whole bunch of numbers, what you get, what you pay for it, and you balance from there. And it is really not that difficult, and it really annoys me because it destroys the game that I still haven't done this. But anyway, thanks for listening to 28 minutes of my rant, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something from it, and if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. Yeah, that's just about it. I'll see you next time.